get by. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Tim Zercher of A-Train Marketing. Tim, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. This is part of the Top Agency series, but since you really deal with behavioral health and addiction centers and those kind of things, I remember I had Eli Leibovitz on, who has what's called a space treatment. It's not astronauts or NASA. It's basically how parents can help their kids. So it's not therapy actually per se. I don't know if you're nodding. Have you heard of this before?
I know Eli, actually.
Oh, I'm shocked. Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think I do, at least if it's the same Eli. It's a cool
I'm
guy.
sure. Yeah, Yale University. So it's a really interesting, if you have kids, it's a really interesting episode. And if you don't, it's still an interesting episode, I find. But check that one out. Also, from the agency side of things, I had Jason Swank on. He was actually on twice. One talked about how he built his agency to 8 figures and sold it. And then the second one was more talking about agencies in the valuation space. And he had bought up agencies. That was interesting. Another one, Tim, that was good was Kevin Hurrigan of Spinutech. He's had an agency since 1995. So it was interesting to talk about the landscape of business, the landscape of the internet, and obviously the agency evolution over time. So check that one out as well. And many more on InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise25. At Rise25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast, and we do the strategy, the accountability, and the full execution. So, Tim, kind of like what you are for addiction centers and behavioral health, we're kind of like the magic elves that run in the background and make it look easy for the host so they can run their business and create amazing content and amazing relationships. For me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give and give to those relationships. And I've found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. I am excited to introduce Tim Zercher, and he's a CEO and owner of A-Train Marketing. And A-Train Marketing is a national firm that provides marketing strategy and services to behavioral health groups. Tim has actually been featured all over the place, multiple national and international publications for his work in marketing strategy, and his team has really worked to build and grow over 400 brands over the last 25 years. They currently have clients in 34 states. So, Tim, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Jeremy.
Talk about A-Train Marketing and what you do. And there's a video piece, so I'm going to share on my screen. So if people are listening to the audio and they want to check out the video, there is that availability. So talk about A-Train.
Yeah, absolutely. So A-Train, like you said, started 25 years ago. I didn't buy it when I was 5 years old, though. I started.
That would have been a good story, though.
Yeah, would have been cool. I started my agency about 10 years ago, and then purchased A-Train and merged both agencies together about 3 years ago. A-Train has a lot of unique pieces to it, but I think the biggest, the most exciting, the most fun is our work with our behavioral health groups. You mentioned a lot of addiction groups, but also a lot of community health groups. North Range, you have on the screen here, is a great example of a large community health group that we work with that has 19 locations and tons of sub brands and complicated brand to manage. But it's really great work that we get to enjoy.
Let's talk about the journey. When you started the agency, and we'll talk about the evolution a little bit, what were you focused in on? And then we'll talk about how you came into this niche with obviously purchasing the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started my agency, it was really just to pay the bills because no one wanted to hire me because I was unproven, right? I was this new kid out of college, and they had, no one wanted to take a risk on a brand new person like me who wanted to do marketing and marketing strategy when I didn't really have any experience. I found that's not true though if you start your own thing and you just say, "Hey, I can do this for you," and you don't charge much, which is what I did to get started, right? So I did that for the first couple of years, grew that a lot, and then what kind of happened is we started with just social media marketing and marketing strategy. We then grew into also doing SEO and then also digital ads and then also website design. Now that I'm doing these things, now clients need new brands. And so I kind of was cobbling together an agency on accident almost just by what clients were asking for. And then about so we grew. We were 0 to, I think we had 25 clients, something like that, almost all in the state of Colorado, 2 or 3 out of state. And then 3 years ago, I was actually friends with the owners of A-Train through a mutual friend that we had, and they said, "Hey, it's time to retire." They're not old by any means. They were retiring at like 45, but because they'd had a successful career, and so they said, "Hey, it's time for us to head out. We want to do something with the agency," and so approached me, and we kind of went that way. The big reason that I purchased A-Train was to get into this behavioral health vertical, and that worked out very, very well. I'd wanted into the space of healthcare marketing for a good probably 4 or 5 years before that. And this opportunity came up, and it worked perfectly. One of those situations where I kind of fell into what made sense.
Was there a common theme with yours? Did you have, I know you weren't focused on one niche at that time.
Yeah.
Was there kind of more of a percentage of a type of client for you?
Yeah. So we were called Z3 Digital back in the day. Z3 was different from most agencies in that we didn't just do projects as they came in, right? A lot of groups will just be like, "Hey, you need a new website. Bam, here's a new website." We were very, very focused on long-term partnership, and that's kind of the only thing I'm interested in. If you just want some quick hit thing, cool. We can do that as a first project, but this better be a long-term relationship or I'm not that interested, right? And so A-Train had a very similar bent to how they operated. Some of the clients that are still clients of A-Train have been clients for I think one is 15 years now. So we've gone through 3 different marketing directors, 2 different CEOs. We're effectively their marketing department, right? And we're just in the background working, and we have been for their brand for a long, long time. And so that kind of deep long-term partnership, that was probably the biggest theme between the two, if that makes sense.
Talk about how it's really interesting, transitioned a client, right? So with Z3, someone come and they go, "Tim, I just need a website."
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
talk about maybe one of those stories they came with one thing. They really just wanted this thing.
Uh-huh.
And then through talking to them, you built it into more of a long-term project, a holistic.
Yeah.
Because we both know like a website's not going to, unless you drive traffic, you have SEO, you have paid. It's just one piece of the puzzle, but
it's hard to understand that.
Yeah. Do you remember one of those times where someone was adamant, "I just need this"?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Well, and so there's a couple of different stories that come to mind. I think which one to pick. I'll stick with one that's fairly recent. This was last year. A guy came to me randomly because he actually saw my job posting and wanted to steal the words I used for the position I was hiring for. Which is funny. I don't think I've ever had anyone call me up and say, "Hey, I just stole your job description, but I really like you guys." He
wasn't asking. He was just telling you.
Exactly. It's already mine. It's already on my job description, but good job. Good writing. So he kind of came to us and he was really thinking, he's like, "Hey, I really need help with my website, right? Our website's trash. I know it is. I know we need to work on it. What can you guys do?" We ended up not even working on his website because after we asked all the questions, right, we're really what they needed was ways to start new relationships with new partners in specific regions, right? So they needed new partnerships in Florida and in North Carolina, I believe it was. And they couldn't penetrate those markets. They really needed help with that. And I was like, okay, that's not a new website. That's a referral campaign and some digital ads and a really powerful LinkedIn campaign and a landing page that drives that communicates the value, et cetera. And so that was a great example. Could have been a website project. Maybe for us, it would have made more money as a website project because it was a large site. It was a good $130,000 project. We actually steered away from that. I said, look, that's not what you need. What you really need is all of this stuff. We can handle that as part of our retainer. Here's our retainer model. I think it was like $7,000 a month, something like that. And off we march. And, if that partnership works for 2 years, well, then that's worth more. But generally, we'll walk away from short-term money in order to get those long-term partnerships. And we do that over and over. But that's probably a good example.
Tim, talk about, it's really important on the questions you're asking when you first start. So talk about some of those, because that really allows you to figure out and diagnose.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of different questions I use, and probably like you, it kind of depends on where the conversation's going, right? Which ones I pull out of my hat. My favorite, and there's I can't remember what the process is called, but it's the asking why 3 times in a row, right? Right. So you need a website. Why do you need a website? Oh, we need more business in XYZ verticals. Why do you need business in those verticals? Oh, your last sales rep left and he took a bunch of your clients. Okay. Why is it like that we need those clients back? Oh, it's a super limited market and there's only 100 potential businesses. Okay. Now I have the actual information. We need to get in front of these 100 people and we need to sell them on why the organization is what they need, not the relationship that left. Right. So I'm a big fan of that method. I'm also a big fan of, and I don't know if there's a good term for this, but I zoom in and then I zoom out and then I zoom in and then I zoom out, right? So people come to us with one big problem that's really ticking them off, whatever. My Google ads are costing me $400 per client, right? And that's way too much and I can't afford it. Okay, cool. Let's zoom in and we talk through Google ads and how they have it set up and what are their systems and what's their historical patterns, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I say, okay, now back up. Let me zoom out here. Tell me about your whole marketing team. What do you have in your team? And whatever. They got one marketing guy, a digital ads guy, and a content writer. Okay. Right off the bat, I don't hear any creative. Probably your Google ads don't look great, right? Like I can immediately start to see part of the problem on the other piece. And then we'll zoom in on other issues and we kind of zoom out again and tell me about the business as a whole. Where are we going? What do we need? Great. Because doing that, we can get really specific with the individual issues, but we can also get the good broad picture so that I can identify problems that they didn't even have, right? Or that they didn't even know was a problem. And that's I think that's when the kind of the light bulb goes off and deep partnerships form, at least for us, is when I come to you because of this and I realize this is a symptom of these 3 key pieces that we need to have that we don't have at all. And if we just fix that, then all the other problems fix themselves. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I love that. And I'm going to talk a little bit, we'll go deeper on the referral campaigns in a second, because I love to hear what you do with that.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone listening, including myself, is interested in, how do you do it? What are some of the strategies? What are some of the things you do? I was looking up, I don't see any general term for it. Tim, I looked up, it says the 3 whys. That's all it says.
Okay, well, there we go.
I know.
Then.
And then it says the theory that involves asking the question why 3 times to get to the root of a problem. So again, I'm sure maybe there's something else I'm not seeing on here, but the theory of the 3 whys is what it's termed.
There we go.
So referral campaigns, this company, I mean, in the end, people want clients, customers, referral partners. They don't care how you do it. If it's a website or if you wave a wand. Talk about, though, the referral campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely. So referral campaigns is something that we built out specifically for our behavioral health clients, because in the behavioral health space, generally at least 50% of all business in the door comes from a referral. those can be referrals from a lot of different locations because it depends on the individual service, right? But I'll stick with one. I'll stick with one example. We have a big addiction treatment group that we work with. Almost all of their referrals come from social workers and primary care physicians, right? Because those are often the ones that see, wow, you're having some real issues. How often do you drink? Okay, you have an actual issue. You need to talk to someone. Here's a great resource, right? Or social workers, it's because they've gotten caught up in the legal system. And it's like, hey, you need help. Here's where you should go. There is generally not a very defined process for who the doctor can refer to. It's just whoever pops in his head that is a good resource, right? Which is a great opportunity for us marketing for that space, right? Because we don't have to get an official contract or memorandum of understanding with a doctor's office. We just need them to understand who we are and why what we provide is really good. And so we built out this system to specifically target those individuals who are what we would call primary referrers. It's like an 18-step process, but it includes directly targeting individual IP addresses. So we literally target the doctor's cell phone and laptop and only his. So we don't hit the janitor that's in his office occasionally and the front office staff that doesn't ever handle, the deep doctor-patient confidentiality conversations, because they're wasted impressions effectively. So we only talk to the people that we really want to talk to. We get that data from a number of systems that we use, and then we deliver messages to them in a kind of specific sequence that we built that has a warming phase. So you build awareness of the general brand, of what we do, that we're in your community, that we're right next door, etc. And then once they've shown engagement in that, we pull them out of that phase and drop them into the actual, what we call engagement phase, which is where Tim calls up Jeremy and says, hey, Jeremy, I know you're a local group here and we'd love to work with you guys. Can I come by the office lunch and tell you about how we handle addiction treatment differently, right? Or whatever that first step in the referral relationship is. Most of these groups have a business development team, and they're starving for conversation starters, right? They're cold knocking, they're knocking on doors, they're cold calling, they're doing all that stuff that is effective, but very, very time consuming. And the system just amplifies the impact. Does that make sense? That was a long answer to a short question.
No, I love how you get into detail. And so you said there's a couple phases there. So there's the warming phase, engagement phase, and would you say is there anything before that, like the reach out phase, or is that kind of everything in the warming phase?
Yeah. So you could say to break it down simply, there's 4 phases. There's targeting first, finding the right people, the right contact information, etc. And sometimes that's done. You even need to do interviews to figure out who actually does refer things, right? Then there's the warming phase. Then there's the engagement phase. And often what happens is of 2,500 contacts, whatever, maybe 100 of them actually engage. That's great. The last phase then is long-term partnership engagement. And those can take the form of a lot of things. One group is doing a quarterly newsletter or a monthly newsletter email that's like just to partners, and it's very medical focused or very stat focused, right? Because they're doctors in that case. And a quarterly mailed gift or swag item that is different every time, just to kind of stay top of mind, stay interesting, if that makes sense. So like that warming phase can last for as long as is reasonable, often at least a year.
So it could be an online newsletter, it could be a physical newsletter, it could be a physical gift. What have you seen that has worked or that you've liked as far as the physical gifts go?
Yeah. Well, so we consider like mailers and physical gifts the same thing, because if a mailer is good, then it has actual value by itself, in our opinion. So one of our favorites that we've done, we did it for a local group that had on one side, it was basically a poster. It was a really nicely designed poster that wasn't super branded, right? So it was really just information focused. It had like the signs of that maybe your patient is struggling with addiction. So that's like for the doctor, for the nurse practitioner, et cetera, they can have up in their office. That's like, the 10 common signs and 5 good ways to start the conversation and basic kind of tips like that. And then on the other side, you flip it around, it's questions for the patient to ask themselves if you wanted to put it up in your waiting room. of like, hey, here's some common signs that you should look for if a loved one is suffering from these things, right? So in that way, it's us giving to the actual office, giving information, giving, interesting, valuable content. And then at the very bottom, in a really small, it says, we're your primary partner for addiction treatment in the blah, blah, blah county, right? And that worked really, really well. Got a ton of engagement because, if 10 or 15 doctors put that up, then you've won because you're in front of them every single day when they're in their waiting room.
Interesting. So they may put it in the waiting room, or they actually may hang it up in the office, one of those two things. For some reason, I love the different, it gets my creative juices flowing. What else have people sent that's been
so many things. Yeah, so many things. We did so we do for our clients, and this is along the same lines, we do these little behavioral health marketing in the wild. So it's a guide for marketing directors in the behavioral health space. It's got like budget breakdown percentages and benchmark reports and stuff like that. Basically a little tiny book that can guide your whole marketing strategy. So we've done that before for our clients. We did another one for a group that was it was a mailer with kind of some standard information, but it had the company's brand had to do with sharks. And so it had a whole chunk like chomped out. And so like even like the picture of the CEO, like half his face was chomped out. It was really cool. Like I'm not our printing genius. Our graphic guy is, but he found a way to actually get, so it looks like an actual postcard that then has like jagged edges. And I don't know how they ripped off the corner the same for 1 million copies. But that got a ton of engagement because people are like, what? It looks like it's already destroyed before it even opens up. And then you're like, oh, and it flows into the design and stuff. That was cool. We sent a lot of like fidget spinners when those were big. We did a whole fidget spinner campaign for a group that killed because even if the doctor doesn't want it, they all have kids and their kids love it. And they then see it for the next 6 months.
I believe like, I'm not sure if this is how accurate this is. I believe those started way before, obviously they become very popular during COVID, but they started because of people with some issues, then they needed something to keep themselves occupied. So it actually has a direct relation to kind of the behavioral health category.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like fidget spinners are one that everyone knows, but there's another thing that we did one time for a group because a big service that they treated was stress, anxiety, and there was another symptom. I can't remember the other piece that this kind of toy really is helpful, right? And so what they did is, and we sent like 20 or 30 to each doctor's office, not for them to give out to patients, right? With our branding and our information and a little pamphlet to the doctor of like, hey, we're the best place to send people if they're suffering from these things. Yeah, and that did crazy well. They were like I don't know if you've ever seen the little fidget blocks. They've got like on one side it's a switch, on the other side it's a little spinny thing. They're really cool. Yeah, they're really cool.
My kids, I think, have every version of those things. So yeah, I've definitely seen that before. Absolutely. Anything else in that? So like you target, which makes sense. You don't want to target the wrong. I mean, that's key. Probably from not only a geographic area, but the type of practitioner, et cetera.
Exactly.
And then you do the warming into engagement to long term. Yeah. In the warming, I'm sure there's a lot that goes on. Is there anything else to talk about that happens in that warming? Because I know that phase, like you're getting people to raise their hand, right? Exactly. And so there's a lot of probably volume. What are the things that work in that warming phase?
I think it goes, there's a couple of sides. I think there's probably three pieces. One is just, yeah, like you said, volume. You have to hit them many times for the message to sink in, no matter how you're reaching them, right? And we also recommend hitting them from lots of sides, right? So they get an email and a mailer and a digital ad and a Spotify ad and a Google ad, right? Like, so it's all hitting them from every side. So that's definitely one piece of it. There's an interesting thing that we've seen works really well in the warming phase, and that's not letting the primary message be the primary copy. And what that means, and it's counterintuitive in some ways. If I'm new to the neighborhood and I'm an addiction treatment group and I want doctors to come reach out to me, I could say, we want your referral. We do great addiction treatment groups, right? That's fine, but it's clearly just an ad. It's clearly not interesting. There's no value add, right? Or I could say the same primary message with saying, we're new to the neighborhood and we want to meet the professionals around us. Come to a block party next week, right? I'm saying the same thing, but I'm saying it in a way that's interesting and actually it's presented almost more as news than it is as a pitch. That works really, really well. And then the last piece is, at the end of the day, I want to inspire curiosity. And so we want to share enough where they're interested, but not so much where they can like check it off in their mental list, right? You know how marketing is. It's about starting a pattern and then not finishing it until you talk with us, right? Or until you finish the form, but you can't see the end of the story until you've taken the first step, so that it gets people involved. There was a famous, I can't remember, I think it was a Super Bowl commercial that cut off halfway through them saying, so make sure you buy, and it then the commercial cut on purpose, right? And everyone was like, what just happened? That's crazy, blah, blah. And it started this whole conversation. And it was clear, if you were paying attention, that the logo was in the bottom corner the whole time. But because it was pattern interrupted, people were Google searching what was the end of that commercial, because they wanted to know the story, like the end of the story. What's the end, right? That we as humans want to hear the end. And so sometimes we'll do that. There's a campaign we just now concepted for a big addiction group on the East Coast. And the primary thing is, and I'm going to say the stat wrong, so nobody look it up. I'm sure it's wrong, but 75% of addicts treated in our community relapse within 3 months. And then the message underneath it is, you can help reverse that trend. Send them to us. We do it differently. And then there's a QR code if you want to see how we do it differently. What's different about your process? Because as a doctor, I know how addiction treatment works in general, but I don't know what's different, right? And so it creates that curiosity that pushes them to the next step. And maybe that next step is just visiting the website, and now they know more. Or maybe it's scheduling a call for a sales rep to visit, whatever. But just creating that curiosity. Does that make sense?
Yes, Tim, love it. And just to recap for a second, really with the warming, the overall arching philosophy is really delivering value. And that even actually goes into your long-term partnership, because you're like, okay, let's deliver value. Let's send them a bunch of fidget spinners. They can give them out. Because if you invite them to a party, in the warming phase, that messaging is more of a give and value to them. Right. And the second thing is, inspiring curiosity. You're opening a loop, and they just need to close the loop. And you seem like a student of copywriting, direct response. I'm curious if there's any books or people that you've learned from.
In copywriting specifically, not so much. I do what works, right? And so I listen and I watch a lot of things. And our process, our theory is just the weird homogenizing of all the information. I think one of my favorite, and it's actually a sales book, but marketing is sales and sales is marketing, right? And to follow it, everything is sales at the end of the day, right? Is Brian Tracy's The Psychology of Selling. Really, really good book. And I highly recommend any marketer or salesperson reads that. It talks about a lot of those pieces: opening loops, open-ended questions, pulling people into a story, into a conversation, as opposed to just telling it to them, showing trust, not saying trust, right? I'm not saying I trust you, but actually giving you something that demonstrates that I trust you, and therefore you should trust me. I think
I had that on audio cassette tape, Tim. Yeah. And one of my favorites with Brian Tracy is Eat That Frog. I don't know if you listen to that one or
I love that. I love that.
It's pretty. I love the book, but it's like, get the most important things done first, and then the rest of the day is more of a breeze. But he's got a lot of great books. So thanks for the reminder. It's been a while since I picked up any of those. I need to revisit them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Back to thanks for going through the 4 phases. Back to the niche for a second. Okay. So these people. How did the conversation though start when they could have got a broker, put it on the market for some, how
Yeah.
did it start with you to sell to you?
Yeah. So I had a business coach that I still use. Is an awesome guy. He's bought and sold 15 different businesses, right? Really experienced guy. And I was part of his group. It's called Tab. It's similar to Vistage. If most listeners probably know about Vistage, it's basically that. It is sometimes smaller businesses, not always. And he had the Tab for like the franchise for basically all of Colorado. I think there were 2 counties outside of his ownership. And I was a member of his tab in the Southern Colorado group, and they were a member of his tab in the Northern Colorado group. And because
Just when I thought
experience
I've
in
heard of
things,
every type of business group, I learned another one.
it never stops. There's no end to them, right? They never ever stop.
Tab. Okay, I'll check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good group. I really like them, and I love in Colorado. It's Dr. Steve and Laura Drury. They're both doctors, but of different things. If my memory serves, but they're excellent facilitators for those things. So I highly recommend them. But so when they were getting ready to sell, they approached Steve, and I said, "Hey, help us get started. What's the process look like?" And the big reason that they had to talk to me instead of just put it open market was they were like, "We want to sell and exit within the next 6 months." And Steve said, "Well, that's not happening. I can maybe get you a year if you sell to," and brokers say that there's 3 ways to sell. It's employee sold, it's open market, or it's friends and family. And he said, open market is a 2-year minimum, at least, sometimes longer. If you want to get out within 6 months or maybe a year, you got to go friends and family. I happen to know a guy. And so he introduced
Had
me.
you talked to that person and told him you're looking to buy a company at that point, or why did he think of you?
No, he knew that I was overly ambitious and moving very quickly. I built my business from literally zero to I think we were doing 50 grand a month within 2 years. And so we were like 100. I think our average growth over the first 8 years was 115% every single year. And so he knew that I was growing, and he knew that acquisitions was probably going to be next. Yeah, and that was basically it. And so he just kind of said, "So what, have you ever thought of acquisitions?" I was like, "Well, yeah, for sure, maybe." And he goes, "Well, I have a conversation for us then."
Talk about the acquisition process. So you meet, and it was interesting because I've had John Warlow on the podcast before. I don't know if you've listened to his book or read his book, Built to Sell. I just was re-listening to it the other week. And so it's interesting to hear how this process went.
Yeah, it was interesting. Selling a business is no joke. It never goes, or buying a business especially, right, never goes as smoothly as you think it will. Never, right? So, I mean, the negotiating process was fairly reasonable and straightforward. I honestly think that's where a lot of people think the complexity is in a business purchase. And sure, like, the contract was long, right? And there was a lot of details, but it's not like it was very complicated, right? Especially when you're negotiating directly and there's not go-betweens. I can just simply say, "Look, my bank won't give me a loan for the total amount. You have to cover X percentage, and then we can do it. Yes, no, okay, cool. We figured that piece out. Timeline of exit. I can't do this. I can do this. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't. Okay, how about this? Right. So like that piece was actually pretty straightforward. The complexity, the difficulty really was in post-purchase. I did a lot of things, I would say, very, very wrong looking back on it. I think I did it. I thought I was planning perfectly, right, going in. But looking back on it, I did a lot of things very wrong. For one, I didn't merge the 2 agencies right away. I kept them going in parallel, which was not very smart, because then I figured out at one point I was spending 29 hours a month between me and my accounting team just to invoice myself. And I was like, this is ridiculous, right? I'm paying you guys an extra $6 grand just to tell me that I made $4 grand from myself. I don't need that, right? And so there was a lot of complexities there that I didn't anticipate. And also old boss, he's on our side. He'll believe us when we say we did our best. It's not our fault that XYZ went wrong. New boss, we got to impress. Your team's doing it all wrong, right? And so there was lots of the back and forth because the teams weren't one team, right? And so of course they weren't working very well. Not by anybody trying to be petty or anything else. It just doesn't work well, right? And so what we did is eventually we merged both, and I said, okay, we're done. We are now one company. Here's the new org chart. Everybody get familiar with your new boss and be cool with it, because I'm not refereeing between myself anymore. This is done. It's like that was one big element that I think was a surprise to me. And I think the other piece was I was caught flat-footed in how disrupted the new sales flow of new business coming in would be by the purchase. Partially because I just didn't understand how A-Train's sales process went. It was very different than how Z3's process went. And partially because I think I underestimated the importance of the relationship. In my agency now and in Z3 originally, the relationship was all under the account manager. Our account managers are also the strategist, and they're also the project manager, and they're also the sales team that grows you. They're everything, right? And so once you sign the contract, basically you don't hear from Tim unless something really big is changing and you need my strategic thought and you're willing to pay for it, right? A-Train was very different. They were involved in like every client check-in every month. There's no way.
When you say they, you mean the owners.
The previous owners, yeah, because there was two owners. It was a husband and wife. That's great.
Then that's the expectation with the clients then.
Exactly. So post-purchase, new things changed. I say nothing's going to change, and they immediately lose access to ownership and strategic brains in all the meetings. Big problems, right? For obvious reasons. But I think those two pieces were probably the biggest. And that, it caused a lot of disruption. It caused a lot of lost revenue. It was
How long did the owners then stay on for after purchase?
Yeah, so they stayed on for, I believe, 3 months in kind of a silent phase of it's sold, but now we're trying to figure out everything before we announce anything, right? And then I believe they stayed on another 3.5 months after that. So it was about a 6-7 month exit process. Again, looking back on it, if I was going to do it again, that would have either been much longer, like a full year, or it would have been instant. This is done, chop, moving on. The halfway point, as most half measures work, wasn't ideal.
How'd you remedy, Tim, now what you realize is, okay, these clients are expecting me to be on all these meetings. How did you end up remedying that at the time?
Well, again, probably would have done it differently if looking back on it. But I did it in, I think, 2 different ways. I think on one side, I said, look, guys, it's not possible. When you have 2 owners and 35 clients, it's doable. When you have 55 clients and 1 owner, I can't be in 55 meetings a month. Like, you can't even schedule it. Like, it won't even schedule even if I wanted to just sit there all day long, I wouldn't fit in the schedules, right? Because no one wants to meet on Fridays and no one wants to meet on Mondays, and no one's going to want. So that's like the time constraints just become impossible. And so how I handled it was I said, look, account managers, you need to be the strategist in the room. They were very experienced. They totally had the ability. They had never been given the authority to do it. So I said, look, I'm empowering you. This is your account. It is your job to keep them happy and satisfied and paying, period. We will support you. Leadership will support you. I will step into meetings. Donna, who's my COO, will step into meetings when you need us, but that's not every meeting. It's upon request, and it's going to get built to the client. So you got to figure out how to do that other project an hour faster, because you got to bill my time, right? And it sort of kind of worked. I think some clients were happy with that approach. Some clients, frankly, didn't really want the previous owners in there anyway. So they were like, awesome. I get to save 2 hours of my billable hours and I can put it towards other stuff. Others were less happy, right? And said, well, if I can't have the actual like experience in the room, I'm out, which did cost us a lot. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's not sustainable to have ownership in every meeting, right? That's just not practical.
I can see the journey where how it started, and then you kind of figure out what makes sense as far as the terms, and also from them staying, and the financial piece and the transition.
Yeah.
How did you come up with the original valuation, or how did they?
Yeah. So we went pretty simple. We said it was, I think, 1.5 of EBITDA. I think they originally asked for 3 times EBITDA. I'm glad I did not say yes, because it was not worth, it wouldn't have been worth 3 times what we paid for sure. Just because of all the disruptions, which they didn't know were gonna happen either, right? No one knew that those disruptions were gonna hit. So I think that was how we went with it, just because we didn't have a much better way.
Was there an outside counsel that came up with that, or how did you end up?
Us, yeah. So my business coach, Steve, we were both clients, right? So he had kind of a double-sided interest in making it a success. He helped us kind of come up with some of the basic numbers, and he was like, look, here's generally how it can work. Boom, 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 right? And he laid out the general framework, and then from there we went down our routes. I think, because I think, for instance, they just had a number in mind, and it's like, well, what's that based on? Why? And so Steve was like, well, generally it's a certain number of EBITDA. I'm like, okay, well then we think it's worth 3, and I'm like, well, I think it's worth 1. So where are we gonna end up, right? And I think also, going back on that, what I would have done very differently is I would have based it on EBITDA based on recurring revenue only, right? Because I think that's a big,
because there was some one-time sales there that was incorporated into it, even though it wasn't recurring.
Yeah. Well, when I purchased A-Train, they were 60%. They were 60% one-time projects in terms of revenue, which is a lot, right? And again, not a big deal if you have 2 salespeople, both owners, going full time. A big problem if you have 0.5 of a salesperson going full time, because I was still also selling on the Z3 side. And so that was definitely an issue as well. But again,
so
one of the many ways.
No, thanks for sharing that. It's really helpful. Talk about, with A-Train marketing, so people can understand a little bit more about what you do. I love kind of the referral campaigns and the 4 phases. What did you do with? You've obviously have a lot of clients all over the over 30 states, but Jefferson Center in particular. What did you do with them?
Yeah. So they're a cool. They're a cool case study, cool example, because it's, for one thing, the campaign is still in process. But for 2, they followed a very intelligent plan. It's the plan that we always recommend to clients, but very, very rarely can leadership and the marketing team and the finances all agree to follow that plan. And in their case, what we did was a digital ad campaign focused on their Medicaid base, because they are a community service group. So they provide a whole plethora of services, from primary medical to behavioral health to addiction treatment, family counseling, all sorts of different verticals. A large group, I think 20 locations, something like that. They're a large team and a lot of moving pieces. So instead of targeting ads for a specific service, which is how they had been going previously, they said, look, most of our revenue, it's like 80% of their revenue, is Medicaid. Why don't we just target people specifically for Medicaid and say, look, we are the best solution for all of your behavioral health challenges, needs, services, therapies, whatever. If you're in Medicaid, here's how it works. Here's how easy we make it. So that was kind of the original concept. What I like about their campaign is they followed the full, what we call an iterative process. And that's going to be the only time I say that word, because I can't say it right no matter what I do. But so phase one, we generated multiple initial concepts. They then tested those concepts with their internal team to determine what would fit best with their actual audience. They then ran the ad campaign for that audience. We then did a next round of iteration based on the actual performance from the first round, right? And not just I saw a funny meme earlier today with A/B testing. Marketers are like, do you like this guy or this guy? And it's the exact same guy. The difference is a tiny bow tie, right? Like, not just the exact same thing in 5 different ways, but totally different pieces, totally different color schemes, totally different expressions on the actor's face, different primary messaging, etc. And then we said, okay, now with the knowledge we have, what actually is performing better, let's build out a whole new ad campaign built on that. And then the plan is eventually we'll do a 3rd round and a 4th round, kind of on a quarterly staggered basis. And that works really, really well. And it worked well for digital. You can't do that if you're doing billboards. I can't reprint the billboard every single month. But you can do that on digital ads really cleanly and really effectively, and it really dials in on what performs best.
Tim, thanks for walking through that.
Yeah.
I have one last question. Before I ask it, I just want to point out people can check out atrainmarketing.com to learn more and more episodes of the podcast. Last question is, you mentioned the Brian Tracy book. I'm just curious, any other favorite books or resources that you like that you've learned from?
Let's see. There's a whole list. I'll give you 2 though that pop to my mind, and maybe they're not the best, but one is how to make friends and influence people, and that's probably what every guest on your whole show says, because it's such a classic.
Dale Carnegie, yeah.
Yep. I read that back in college, and it really, really helped me kind of start my career.
I'm trying to bribe my kids to read it because I think it's just valuable.
It's how people work.
Look at from the other person's perspective and really pay attention to others, right? So
exactly. Well, and it's human nature is human nature, right? It's the same now as it was 50, 60 years ago. We're not selling typewriters anymore, which is a lot of his examples, right? But beyond that, it's the same stuff. People still behave the same. And so I think that really helped me as not most people could launch a whole business straight out of college and do very well. The reason I did well is because of the relationships I built using things that were in that book. Not because of me. I'm not some smart person, really. I built good connections, and they helped me build these things, right? And I think the second book is The Little Red Book of Selling, and I can't remember the author. You've got Google open. I'll let you search it out. But really good, again, very basic, but really good basic psychology, basic human behavior, and also just really applicable to kind of everyday life. Some of the stuff, some of his recommended strategies are maybe not what I would recommend.
Jeffrey Gittimore.
Yeah, there we go.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, he has
Little
some
Book of Selling.
Yeah. The Little Red Book of Selling. Yeah, it's he has some strategies that would be construed as like unethical selling strategies that I might not recommend. But like 80% of the book at least is really good.
Little Red Book of Selling, 12 and a half principles of sales greatness, how to make sales forever is what the subtitle is.
Yep. There you go. So yeah, I'd say at least 85% of it was dead on, really smart stuff. Again, old book, nothing that new, but great principles.
Love it.
Yeah.
Tim, I want to be the first one to thank you. Everyone check out atrainmarketing.com, and we'll see everyone next time. Tim, thanks again.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like $100 grand.